Console gaming, a necessity for gracious living. While the modern era of gaming often appears to be a neat little battle for dominance between the likes of Nintendo, Sony and Microsoft, the reality, particularly if we glance back through the mists of time, is far messier than most would dare to imagine. Things weren't always so clean-cut. Take the late 1980s, for instance. In the United States, the Nintendo Entertainment System sat upon its plastic throne utterly unchallenged. Meanwhile, over in Western Europe, we were far too busy fiddling with our microcomputers, the Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum and Amstrad CPC 464, to care about plumbers and pixelated princesses. And while the 16-bit era did eventually bring a bit of unity to these fragmented markets, in many other parts of the world, especially developing countries and those newly divorced from the iron grip of the Soviet Union, 8-bit console gaming was only just starting to find its footing. But here's where it gets interesting. Thanks to extraordinarily lax piracy laws and a general disregard for copyright enforcement, a new underground gaming scene began to bubble up. One not dominated by Nintendo itself, but by unlicensed clones of the Famicom. Yes, my absolute darlings, Famiclones. Dubious doppelgangers of Nintendo's finest, shipped en masse across borders, often sold in dodgy markets and electrical shops alike. These machines weren't simply placeholders for the real thing, they were the gaming culture in entire nations. So, with that said, welcome to the world where piracy wasn't the problem, it was the platform. That's right, in today's episode, we are delving into the history of one of the most prolific clone consoles of all time, a bootleg beast so widespread that it practically defined console gaming for an entire generation across multiple continents. I am Lady Decade, and this is the bonkers story of the ridiculously named Ending Man Terminator 2. If you're watching a video on the Terminator console of all things, then the chances are you've got quite exquisite taste in obscure gaming history, and you're probably a bit of a games hoarder too, like me. So why not build up your digital collection for next to nothing? You can use my discount codes in the pinned comment to save up to 90% on thousands of games and support my work simultaneously. Whether it's modern or retro, there are plenty of deals to plunder, and what's even better is the fact that there are no newly introduced expensive import tariff fees to pay on digital goods, so everybody wins. So enjoy it! Yeah, someone somewhere decided that Ending Man Terminator 2 was a perfectly sensible name for a game console. I can only assume that they were either an Arnold Schwarzenegger fan, a time traveller, or possibly both. While we've previously explored systems like the Pegasus, the infamous Polish Famiclone that made significant waves in Central Europe, today's machine was far more prolific. The Chinese-produced Terminator 2, also known under its even more grandiose alias of the Super Design Ending Man BS500, was unleashed upon the world and found eager buyers in countries such as the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, Serbia, Croatia, Bulgaria, North Macedonia, Romania, Bosnia, Albania, Montenegro, Armenia, Georgia, Russia, India, Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, Algeria, Kenya, Hungary, and Ukraine. Yeah, I just named a lot of places because this thing was sold in a lot of places. And this isn't even exhaustive, because much like glitter at a children's birthday party, the Ending Man got everywhere, including Thailand. This means that if you were living outside of the pampered bubble of the West, there's a fair chance that this cheeky little console was your introduction to video games. To call this thing popular is putting it mildly. In fact, based on the sheer global spread alone, I wouldn't be shocked in the slightest if more people across the planet remember playing on an Ending Man Terminator than on a legitimate NES. And honestly, that's kind of beautiful in its own weird copyright infringing way. These things were that bloody common, a true Trojan horse of grey market gaming that snuck into homes under the radar and proceeded to raise an entire generation of gamers on pirated Mario, bootleg Contra, and more dodgy copies of Duck Hunt than anyone could ever legally justify. It doesn't just take digging to uncover how much nostalgia surrounds this peculiar little clone console. All over the internet you'll find people reminiscing about their time with the Ending Man like it was some kind of beloved childhood pet, albeit one made out of cheap plastic and copyright violations. Take, for instance, this pair of Romanians I came across who run the charming YouTube channel @GameMin GHD. In one of their videos, they wax lyrical about their experiences with the Terminator 2, explaining that at the time, simply having access to electronics was a luxury. Romania only had recently shaken off the shackles of communism, and being able to sit down and play video games, even on a knockoff system, felt like the very embodiment of freedom. They even joked that the kids who did somehow manage to get their hands on a genuine NES were probably the dodgy ones. I mean, really, where did they get that kind of cash in mid-90s Romania? And more importantly, who did they know? Because it certainly wasn't being sold down at the local supermarket next to the salami. And it's not just Romanians sharing these experiences either. Over at Eurogamer, writer Robert Purchase recounted his own struggle to identify the console his Bulgarian girlfriend grew up with. She could describe the games in vivid detail, Super Mario Bros., Duck Hunt, the lot, but she had no idea what a Nintendo actually was. Spoiler alert, what she'd grown up with was indeed the Ending Man Terminator 2. And it wasn't some bootleg oddity in her eyes. It was just her console. The fact that it wasn't officially licensed was completely irrelevant. To her and millions of others, this was Nintendo. It really goes to show just how far removed these clone consoles are from the minds of most Westerners. As highlighted in that Eurogamer article, it seems utterly bizarre to us that someone could feel such powerful nostalgia for Nintendo games, yet feel absolutely nothing for the Nintendo brand itself. But for millions of players across Eastern Europe and beyond, that's exactly how it was. In Bulgaria, for example, everyone seemed to have one of these machines. It wasn't just a weird off-brand option, it was the console. And it wasn't just exclusive to Bulgaria either. Gamers across dozens of countries recalled this exact same ritual, poring over trays of mysterious, lurid yellow cartridges at market stalls or discount electronics shops, wondering what digital treasures might be lurking inside of each one. There was no official catalogue, no box blurbs, no Metacritic, just a plastic shell, some dodgy art, and the promise of some surprise. Visually, many of these clones, particularly the Terminator 2, wore their influences on their sleeves, or rather on their boxes. A number of versions used artwork directly inspired by Japanese Sega Mega Drive packaging, complete with colourful triangles and similarly styled logo fonts. Was it a deliberate attempt to trick unsuspecting customers into thinking they were buying a Mega Drive? Or was it just a blatant act of box art theft because it looked cool? Honestly, I wouldn't put either theory past them. But one thing's for sure, despite their origins in factory line fakery, these consoles genuinely brought joy to the people who played them. Maybe that's all that really matters. While the NES came with its iconic but distinctly toy-like zapper, the Ending Man's bundled light gun, that thing looked like it belonged in an action movie. You could have waved it around and gotten arrested in at least 6 countries. Honestly, if we're talking sheer style points, this bootleg clone wipes the floor with the NES. Now, in terms of functionality, the Terminator 2 operated just like most other Famiclones. It played games in the Famicom form factor, but if you happen to own a special converter, and many did, you could also play American NES cartridges, a handy bonus for anyone lucky enough to find one in their local market or black market suitcase. Most of the games themselves were churned out across Taiwan, China and Russia, entire factories pumping out unlicensed Mario, Contra and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles knockoffs like they were going out of style, which to be fair, they never really did. In fact, game cartridges for this machine remained widely available well into the 2000s, often outlasting the NES's retail presence in some countries by over a decade. That's some serious staying power for knockoffs. Now, while the Ending Man was sold under many different names depending on the region, some more ludicrous than others, One of the most well-documented and intriguing examples of its marketing and distribution comes from Ukraine. So pour yourself a drink and settle in, because it's time for a little lesson in Ukrainian gaming history. Contrary to what many assume, the Dendy and the Terminator weren't the same thing, but they certainly shared shelf space and childhood memories in Ukraine. While the Dendy brand was famously spearheaded by Russian tech distributor Steepler, the Terminator-style clones had their own moment in the Ukrainian spotlight, particularly in the Donetsk region, thanks to a company known as Atlantita Enterprise Limited. Atlantita didn't manufacture the machines themselves. Like most companies in this wild west of gaming, within this wild Eastern Bloc in this case, they ordered their units from Chinese factories, slapped their branding on them and distributed them locally under various labels, most notably under the Dendy name, despite these units having little to do with Steepler's original lineup. So yes, confusion reigned as usual. Now, to give credit where it's due, the machines distributed by Atlantita were considered quite decent by Famiclone standards. For starters, they came with 3.5mm headphone jacks built into the gamepads, which, let's be honest, was miles ahead of what most clone systems offered, or even what the NES did. Perhaps more importantly, they were capable of outputting games in the CCAM video format, an absolute godsend for post-Soviet gamers, given that most Soviet-era televisions didn't support PAL or NTSC. This meant that players in Ukraine could finally see their games in full colour, as opposed to the depressing monochrome blur many grew up with. Speaking of which, if you want a taste of just how grey and grim things were before these colourful bootlegs took hold, I highly recommend the 2011 YouTube documentary, The Curse of the Grey Elephant. It's over an hour long and features a nostalgic and often hilarious Russian reflection on growing up with the Dendy. There's a fantastic moment where the narrator realises that Nintendo games aren't supposed to be in black and white, which I think we can all agree is both tragic and iconic. So yes, the clone console scene in Ukraine was vibrant, chaotic, and very much defined by local distribution outfits like Atlantita. But we're not done with this saga just yet. So let's stay in Ukraine a little longer. Now, while Steepler's Dendy brand famously sported a cutesy little elephant as its mascot, presumably to make pirated Mario feel more family-friendly, Atlantita's Ukrainian console line wasn't about to be outdone. Instead of an elephant, their units were adorned with a hippo. Sadly, I've not been able to uncover any footage of this Ukrainian hippo-based console in action, but according to accounts dug up from the deepest corners of Eastern Europe tech forums, it was reportedly marketed as a set-top box in 1993, complete with accompanying television ads, and believe it or not, it supposedly had its own TV show, Dendy Club. Now, yes, I know that name sounds very confusing, given that this wasn't a Steepler product, but hey, copyright and branding rules were more like vague suggestions in the 90s Ukrainian clone scene. According to the law, Dendy Club featured competitions, trivia questions, and prizes supplied by Atlantita themselves. It was all terribly ambitious for a company selling rebranded grey market tech, but somehow it worked. Allegedly, within its first year on the market, 10,000 units of this hippo-bearing console was sold in Ukraine alone, with an additional 5,000 systems making their way into Moscow before the whole operation collapsed, and collapse it did, reportedly due to a falling out between Atlantita and their mysterious overseas partners. Quelle surprise! By the following year, the clone console market in the region had become utterly flooded, with new and cheaper devices arriving seemingly weekly. Atlantita gracefully bowed out of the console racket and returned to safer territory, flogging office equipment in Donetsk, which they allegedly continued doing until at least 2011. As for the Ending Man brand itself, back in its Chinese homeland, these consoles were churned out and shipped across the globe right up until 2014, when Famiclone production finally began to slow down. That's right, 11 years before the time of this writing, they were still making these things. I did say they were prolific, didn't I? But like any good knockoff icon, it simply refused to stay dead. Unsurprisingly, Ending Man made a comeback in 2019 with a shiny new redesign that's still available to buy today from Chinese retailers, often brand new and still sealed in a box. Now, depending on where you shop, these modern renditions are sometimes listed under the uninspired title of Retro 8-bit TV console, which, let's be honest, sounds more like something you'd find in a dodgy Argos clearance bin. Personally, I far prefer the far more dramatic and frankly more appropriate name, Terminator 2020. Much more futuristic, much more nostalgic, much more ridiculous. I can't really help myself but wish they'd leaned into the same theme just a little harder. I mean, wouldn't it be glorious if the box said, "Come with me if you want to live"? But alas, I suspect the marketing team didn't quite stretch to Schwarzenegger quotes. Still, there's something oddly heartwarming about seeing this relic reborn. Wicked's Gamer and Collector uploaded an unboxing video of one of these 2020-era units, and what you'll notice immediately is how remarkably faithful the design still is. More than what can be said for the functionality of the cartridge ejector, which has now been reduced to purely decorative. Yes, sadly, the eject button is no longer operational, presumably removed in a last-minute cost-cutting measure. There is one welcome upgrade, though. To drag the system into the 21st century, the Terminator 2020 is now powered via USB, replacing the old dodgy wall plugs that used to heat up like kettles and hum like angry bees. Now, as for the Ending Man Terminator, or PY, or BS500, or whatever wonderfully nonsensical name it went with in your region, I've done my absolute best today to piece together its history for you. But the truth is, much of this console story remains cloaked in mystery, varying wildly from country to country, which is to be expected, I suppose, when dealing with a not even remotely legitimate clone device that danced gleefully around international copyright laws. Because unlike official hardware, no one was keeping neat records of how these things were distributed, repackaged, or resold. They just existed, arriving uninvited into homes, markets, and childhoods across the globe, each one carrying a slightly different bootleg identity. And that's where you come in. If you grew up with one of these curious contraptions, no matter what name it went by or how dodgy the box art looked, I'd absolutely love to hear your story. Pop down to the comment section and share your memories of this outlaw console. What games did you play? Where did you get it? Did you even know it was a knockoff? Because I and many others are genuinely fascinated by this underdocumented slice of gaming history, a shadow realm of retro tech that deserves far more attention than it gets. And let's be honest here, in a world that's changing faster than ever, geopolitically and otherwise, it's starting to feel like we're on the verge of a whole new chapter in clone console history. Yet despite this massive geopolitical shift, one thing has remained surprisingly consistent. The Ending Man Terminator, in one form or another, refuses to die. Whether it's a BS500 from the 90s or a USB-powered retro TV console from 2019, there's still clearly a market for this strange little plastic dinosaur. And with so many people around the world having grown up with it, bootleg or not, it's no wonder that this is the console many instantly think of when they hear the words retro gaming. Hasta la vista, baby. Don't forget, you can build up your digital collection for next to nothing. Use my discount codes in the pinned comment to save up to 90% on thousands of games and support my work simultaneously. Whether it's modern or retro, there are plenty of deals to plunder, and what's even better is the fact that there are no newly introduced expensive import tariff fees to pay on digital goods. Every purchase goes towards funding this channel, or if you want to support my work in a more personal way, access my cosplay library and more over on Patreon and YouTube memberships. Happy shopping, and I'll see you all in the next video.